I've stated before on this channel more than once that I don't care for a lot of the big war films. In by big, I predominantly mean their scope. There are some I enjoy, although even when you go back to Lewis Milestone's All Quiet on the Western Front through to Kubrick's Paths of Glory, I feel like these films effectively function as these vainglorious, kind of overwrought, bloated epics which just glorify violence in general and one side as a noble victor in this grand conflict. And even Kubrick's Paths of Glory, it's a Kirk Douglas vanity piece. It has these pretensions of being something about civics or ethics, and yet ultimately it's just this display of spectacle. I feel as though Truffaut's criticisms of the film couldn't have been more apt. Now, there are films such as Apocalypse Now, which, as successful as that film is, it is still problematic. I mean, you look at, I don't like using that word problematic for reasons which should be clear to anyone, but the thing with Apocalypse Now is we know John Milius contributed to that screenplay, and what do we think John Milius is thinking when that helicopter attack sequence to Ride of the Valkyries is being enacted? Now, of course, from Coppola's perspective, that's a very clever homage, allusion, rather, I guess, to the KKK sequence in Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. It's a fantastic portal through time and an act of illuminating a certain continuity within the history of American exceptionalism, let's say. So the point I'm making is Apocalypse Now had merit to it which rescued it from the category of vainglorious epic which seeks to promote war as this grand patriotic spectacle rather than an atrocity which ought to be avoided at all costs. Elem Klimov's Come and See was of course the best of this, and unfortunately it was a veteran, Oliver Stone, who seemed to tip with his film Platoon that genre away from any merit it might have had. Kubrick displayed some redeeming Paths of Glory with Full Metal Jacket, I feel, in 1987, which Full Metal Jacket actually had the audacity to potentially depict the Vietnamese as in the right. Think about that for a moment. The bravery of an American film to do that. Then, of course, you had another film I've promoted on this channel before is Clint Eastwood's Letters from Iwo Jima. I remember that video because this is where I discussed the issue quite thoroughly of the war film. Clint Eastwood is definitely an American patriot. There's no denial about that. And so when he decides that he wants to handle the Japanese army in the Second World War, it's inevitably going to be depicting them as kind of misguided or horrid or just humans rather than heroes. Flags of Our Fathers did not succeed in this category. It was more of the... I mean, Eastwood has his priorities and prerogatives as a filmmaker and as a political citizen of the United States, obviously. Although I feel as though the more interesting and accurate depiction of war occurred in the film where he wasn't depicting his characters as heroes, but again, as I said, as humans. Now it brings me to Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan, a film which is not about the glories of battle, but rather, and somewhat paraphrasing Nolan himself, it's about the terror of knowing whether one will live or die. I'm more impressed with Dunkirk as a production than anything else, and I can appreciate that Dunkirk isn't about the ingenious strategies and victories which led to an Allied triumph in the Second World War. It's more about adversity and the courage through strife, which is more interesting and noble a cause, I feel. Dunkirk, it's a film which doesn't outstay its welcome at about 1 hour and 40 minutes, and I can't help but appreciate what it has to offer, and I would consider it on the better side of Nolan's filmography compared with the films I've liked less from him, which are The Prestige, The Dark Knight Rises, and Oppenheimer.